I smiled. 3 days later, he discovered that the $180,000 inheritance he was expecting had gone to charity. And that was just the beginning of my lesson on gratitude. My name is Robert. I'm 68 years old, and for a long time I believed that being a father meant enduring anything for my children. How wrong I was. Sometimes love needs to come with consequences, you know? And sometimes those consequences arrive wrapped up like a Christmas present. Let me tell you something. I spent 40 years building a construction business from scratch. 40 years waking up at 5 in the morning, dealing with difficult clients, managing employees, paying taxes. All this while thinking about leaving something for my son Jason and my granddaughter Emily. I thought I was building a legacy of hard work and dedication. But do you know what I was really building? A spoiled son who thought deserving money was a birthright. A 35-year-old man who had never worked a single day in his life because Dad always solves everything. A guy who looked at my sweat as if it were something disgusting, something that shamed him. The whole thing blew up at Christmas 2023. I had planned a special Christmas dinner, the kind that takes all day to prepare. Stuffed turkey, homemade cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie from my late wife Margaret's recipe. All made by hand, with love, hoping to have my family together one last time before I made a decision that had been maturing for months. Jason arrived with that look on his face, as if he were doing me a huge favor just by showing up. Emily, my 16-year-old granddaughter, was glued to her cell phone as always. And it was there, at the table I had built myself 20 years ago, that my son showed me exactly what he thought of me. Dad, honestly, this looks like something a beggar would eat. Couldn't you have ordered a real Christmas dinner? My friend Marcus's wife always makes amazing dinners, hires a caterer, professional decorator. This is embarrassing. It was there that I realized that love has an expiration date, and mine had expired at that exact moment. If you've ever experienced something similar, being disrespected by the person you help the most, you'll want to hear the rest of this story. Hit the like button now, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because this lesson about family and respect will surprise you, and you can be sure, what happened next was even more impactful. Have you ever had that moment when the world stops and you realize you've spent your whole life being an idiot? That's exactly what happened when Jason kept destroying the dinner I had prepared with so much care. Look, I know the house wasn't a palace. It was the same house where I raised him after Margaret died of cancer 10 years ago. The same kitchen where he ate thousands of meals I made. The same backyard where he played as a child. But for him, now all of that was embarrassing. "Emily, don't touch that food," he told my granddaughter. "We'll stop at McDonald's on the way back. At least the food there is clean." "And clean? The food I cooked with fresh ingredients that I bought myself was dirty? The man who worked his whole life with his hands, who built houses for entire families, who put food on his table for 35 years, was now too dirty to prepare a meal?" Emily at least tried to be polite. "Grandpa, thank you for preparing all this. It looks delicious." But Jason cut her off. "Emily, you don't need to pretend. He knows this is far from what you're used to eating." What you're used to eating. As if she were his daughter and not my granddaughter. As if I hadn't supported them both for years while he was searching for his calling. As if the $2,500 I sent them every month hadn't bought much better food than that supper he was despising. "Jason," I said, trying to remain calm, "I spent all day preparing this. It's the recipe your mother used, the same supper you loved when you were a child." "Dad, I've grown up. My expectations have changed. Emily is used to a different standard of living now. There's no going back in time. A different standard of living, paid for by me. With the money I sweated to earn while he sought inspiration, writing a book that never got finished, in a house I had helped to put a down payment on, driving a car I had financed. It was at that moment that I stood up from the table, not out of anger. It was something colder, more calculated. I had made a decision. "You know what, Jason? You're right. Your standards have changed. I looked him straight in the eyes. And mine have too. Let me explain something Jason forgot to consider. I have an excellent memory for numbers. 40 years building budgets, calculating materials, closing contracts. I remember every penny I spent on him. After Margaret died, Jason came to live with me just for a few months until he recovered. That was 8 years ago. 8 years of a few months. 8 years of me supporting a grown man who couldn't hold down a job for more than 6 months because he didn't identify with conventional work. When Emily was born and her mother disappeared, I didn't hesitate. I took responsibility. I paid for a lawyer to get custody. I paid for a private pediatrician, private school, clothes, toys, everything. Because I felt I was investing in my family. $2,500 a month religiously for 6 years. That's $180,000, just in allowance. Not including extras, a new car when the old one didn't impress his dates, $35,000. A down payment on an apartment when he finally decided to try living alone, $25,000. Emily's medical expenses when she broke her arm, $8,000 because he didn't have insurance. English and piano lessons for my granddaughter, $12,000. Oh, and the money for him to invest in himself. A writing course, $3,000. Home office equipment, $5,000. Trips to seek inspiration, $15,000. Therapy when he said he was finding his identity, $8,000. Total, $291,000 over 8 years. Almost $300,000 for a man who had just told me that my food looked like beggar's food. But you know what hurt the most? It wasn't the numbers. It was when I realized that Emily, my granddaughter, was ashamed of me. She could barely look me in the face. A 16-year-old girl I helped raise, whom I took to school thousands of times, who called me best grandpa ever until about 2 years ago. Now she sat there, quiet, silently agreeing that grandpa was embarrassing, that the house where she grew up was inadequate, that the man who paid for her private school didn't even deserve a genuine thank you for a Christmas dinner. That's when I understood. I wasn't creating gratitude. I was creating monsters. And monsters, by definition, always want more. Want to know when this whole "I'm not good enough" thing started? When Jason started hanging out in those aspiring artists' social circles downtown. People who had never really worked, but who talked about authentic experiences and class privilege as if they knew anything about life. He started bringing Emily to these gatherings, expensive coffee shops where a coffee cost more than my entire lunch. Art galleries where people who had never held a tool talked about the aesthetics of manual labor as if it were an abstract concept. Emily would return from these outings full of new ideas. "Grandpa, did you know that manual labor is capitalist exploitation? Grandpa, Jason said you never taught me about culture because you only know about construction. Grandpa, when I go to college, I'm going to study important things, not manual labor." Manual labor. The 16-year-old girl talking about what sustained her as if it were something dirty. Jason loved these moments. He saw it as a victory for him to have educated Emily about social perspective. As if 40 years supporting a family, creating jobs, building houses where people raised their children was less important than sitting around talking about art in expensive coffee shops. "Dad, you need to understand that Emily is going to live in a different world than yours," he once told me. "She needs to learn how to interact with polite people, not just construction workers and electricians. Educated people, as if the men who worked with me were stupid. As if Carlos, my supervisor of 20 years who speaks 3 languages, was less educated than his friends who talked about books they'd never read. As if Miguel, who supported 5 children and still attended engineering school at night, was less worthy of respect than those clowns who lived off their parents' allowances." But the worst part was watching Emily absorb it. Watching her stop telling me about school because Grandpa wouldn't understand these things. Watching her stop showing me her good grades because math and science are basic stuff. Watching her start talking to me as if I were slow, explaining simple things as if I were a child. A girl I taught to ride a bike, whom I comforted when she cried, whom I took fishing at the lake in the summers. Now she looked at me as if I were a necessary burden, someone she tolerated because she needed the money I sent. That's when I realized Jason wasn't just wasting my money. He was poisoning my granddaughter against me. You know that moment when you stop feeling angry and start feeling something cold, calculated. That's exactly what happened when I got up from the table that Christmas. It wasn't about Jason disrespecting me anymore. It was about him corrupting Emily. I went to my office, a corner of the house they always thought was too messy, and grabbed my briefcase. 40 years of financial planning, wills, investments, everything organized because I've always been a man who prepares for the future. Jason yelled from the kitchen, "Dad, are you going to sulk now? Emily wants to leave. This house is depressing." Depressing. The house where he lived for 8 years for free. The house I kept immaculate, even after Margaret died, because I wanted Emily to have good childhood memories. Depressing. I went back to the kitchen with the folder in my hand. They were getting ready to leave. Emily already in her coat. Jason fiddling with his phone, looking like he'd just fulfilled his annual social obligation. "Jason," I said, my voice calmer than it had been all day. "Before you go, I need to tell you something." Dad, if we're going to talk about dinner, I don't have the patience today. Emily has commitments." "It's not about the dinner. It's about your future." That caught his attention. Jason always paid close attention when the subject was his future, especially the part where he would inherit my money without having to work for it. "Remember when you asked me about the will? When you said you wanted to make sure Emily would be protected when I died?" "Of course I remember." "Why?" I opened the folder and took out 2 documents. One was my original will, in which Jason inherited everything: the house, the business, the savings, the investments. Total, about $400,000. The other was the new version, which I had my lawyer prepare 3 months ago, but I hadn't signed it yet. Because I made a decision today. It was the first time in years that I'd seen Jason pay full attention to something I was saying. Emily also stopped fiddling with her phone. "What decision, Dad?" "The decision that you're right, that your standards have indeed changed, and that perhaps it's time for you to learn to maintain them without my help." Do you want to know Jason's reaction when I said I was going to change my will? He laughed. He literally laughed in my face like I was bluffing. "Dad, stop it. You're not going to do any of that. You love me too much." He loves me too much. As if love were synonymous with being a doormat. As if I were obligated to finance his arrogance for the rest of my life just because he left me. "Jason, I loved your mother too. And when she was dying of cancer, do you know what she made me promise? That I wouldn't let you become a useless man." I am not useless. You're a 35-year-old man who has never paid a bill in his life, who lives off the money I sweat to earn, who taught my granddaughter to be ashamed of me. If that's not worthless, I don't know what is. Emily finally spoke. "Grandpa," Jason didn't want to say. "Emily, darling, let me ask you a question. When was the last time you thanked me for something? Really, looking me in the eyes, thanked me for paying for your school, your clothes, your outings?" Silence. Emily stared at the floor because she knew the answer was never. She had learned from her father that money was an obligation, not a favor. Jason lost his temper. "Dad, you're being ridiculous. Emily is a child. She doesn't need to be thanking you for basic things." "Basic things? Jason, I pay $1,800 a month just for her school. That's 3 times what I spend on myself in an entire month. How is that basic?" "Because you're her grandfather. It's your obligation." There it was. The word I was waiting for. Obligation. Not love, not family, not gratitude. Obligation. As if I were a bank that existed solely to finance their lives. "Jason, let me explain something to you about obligations. My only obligation was to raise you until you were 18, to give you education, food, shelter. I did that. Everything after that was my choice, and choices can change. You can't just cut off our allowance. Our allowance. A 35-year-old man talking about allowance like a teenager. Yes, I can, and I will. Starting in January, you two will learn to live without my money. Emily started to cry. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a cry of panic. She was 16 years old and had never considered the possibility of living without my financial support. Jason blushed. Dad, you can't do this to Emily. She's innocent. Is Emily innocent? Then why did she just spend 2 hours agreeing that my house is embarrassing and my food is disgusting? You know what I did after they left my house that Christmas? I called my lawyer. No, just kidding. First, I poured myself a nice whiskey, sat in my armchair, and called my lawyer. Robert, everything all right? It's Christmas, man. Tom, do you remember those documents you prepared 3 months ago? The new will and the deed of gift? I remember. Why? Did you decide to sign? I've decided. And there's more. I want to cancel the automatic transfers as well. All of them. Tom was quiet for a second. He knew my family. He knew the whole situation. Are you sure about this? Once you sign, there's no going back. Tom, I've never been so sure of anything in my life. On Monday, I went to his office. Signing those papers was one of the most liberating feelings of my life. The money Jason expected to inherit, $180,000 in investments, went directly to the Children's Hospital Foundation. The house would go to Emily, but only when she turned 25 and if she had graduated from college. Otherwise, it would go to charity as well. But the best part was canceling the automatic transfers, $2,500 leaving my account every 5th of the month. Money I didn't even notice anymore because it had become routine, like paying the electricity or water bill. I didn't tell them right away. I let January pass. I let them figure it out on their own when the money didn't arrive in their account. I let them call the bank, thinking it was a system error. I let them experience what it was like to have their expectations unmet. The phone rang on January 8th at 3 p.m. Dad, there's something wrong with this month's transfer. There's nothing wrong, Jason. I canceled. Silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that happens when reality finally comes knocking. Canceled it? What do you mean? What do you mean? I'm not sending you any more money. I thought that was clear at Christmas. Dad, you can't be serious. Emily has school, she has expenses. I have bills to pay. Jason, you're 35. Emily is 16. You both have brains and 2 hands. Time to learn how to use them. But Dad, Emily's school costs $1,800 a month. So you'll have to choose. Either she goes to public school, or you get a job that pays for private school. Simple as that. The call lasted 43 minutes. Jason went through all the stages: denial, anger, bargaining, despair. At no point did he apologize for how he treated me at Christmas. At no point did he acknowledge that perhaps he had been ungrateful. It was just financial panic. And you know what? I slept better that night than I had in years. 2 weeks after I cut off the money, they showed up at my door. They didn't knock. They didn't warn me they were coming. Jason had a key to the house. After all, he'd lived there for 8 years, and he simply walked in as if he owned the place. I was in the kitchen making my breakfast when I heard the door open. Emily came in first, her eyes red from crying, followed by Jason, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Grandpa, Emily said in a tearful voice, please don't do this to us. I promise I'll be more grateful. That almost broke me. Almost. But then Jason opened his mouth. Dad, this has gone too far. Emily is suffering because of your tantrum. She had to leave private school and is having to adapt to public school. You are destroying your own granddaughter's future because of wounded pride. Wounded pride. As if 40 years of disrespect were a matter of male ego. Jason, sit here, I said, indicating the kitchen table. Emily, you too. Let's talk like adults. Finally, you're going to be rational, Jason sighed. I'm going to ask you both a question, and I want an honest answer. At Christmas, when you were despising the feast I prepared, did you stop for a second to think about how I felt? Emily looked down. Jason rolled his eyes. Dad, it wasn't about you. It was about standards. Jason, answer the question. Did you think about my feelings? Silence. And when Emily said my house was depressing, did you correct her? Did you explain that this house was where you grew up, where your mother died, where I raised the family alone for 10 years? More silence. And when you left here talking about going to McDonald's because my food was bad, did you remember that I spend $400 a month on groceries just to make sure there's always good food when you visit? Jason exploded. Dad, we can't keep walking on eggshells every time we come here. You're too sensitive. Sensitive? Jason, I worked for 40 years supporting my family. I took care of your mother when she was dying. I raised you both when you couldn't even hold down a job. And now I'm sensitive because I didn't like being treated like trash in my own home. Emily finally spoke. Grandpa, we didn't mean to hurt you. But it hurt, Emily. And do you know why it hurt so much? Because I realized you don't respect me. You see me as an old ATM that has an obligation to finance your lives. A week after their visit, I discovered that Jason had decided to wage public war against me. I found out in the worst possible way, through Mrs. Martha, my neighbor of 20 years. Robert, she said when she found me picking up the mail, I can't believe what they're saying about you. My stomach churned. What are you talking about, Martha? That you abandoned your family because of a silly argument, that you cut off Emily's support out of spite. The poor girl is telling everyone at church that her grandfather went crazy and left her without private school. Church. Jason had taken Emily to the community church, the same one where Margaret and I got married, where Emily was baptized, to make a public drama out of our family situation. Martha, things aren't quite like that. Robert, I've known you for 20 years. I know what kind of man you are. But people are talking. They're saying you're becoming senile, that you can no longer make rational decisions. Senile. Jason was spreading rumors that I had mental problems to justify why he had lost his source of income. The following Sunday, I went to church. It was my first time in 6 months because I'd stopped going after Jason started bringing Emily and insisting on sitting far away from me. When I walked in, I felt the stares, the whispers. After the service, several people came to talk to me, not to ask how I was doing, but to advise me on the importance of family forgiveness. Brother Robert, said Pastor Mike, sometimes we, as older men, have a hard time accepting that times have changed. Perhaps it would be good for you to talk to someone about these feelings of abandonment. Feelings of abandonment, like I was a crazy old man imagining things. Sarah, who worked at the church nursery, was more direct. Robert, Emily is suffering a lot. She told me you cut off her allowance just because she didn't like a Christmas dinner. That doesn't seem like something you would do. And it's not something I would do, I replied. The story is much more complicated than that. Then tell the truth, Robert. Because the way things are, you seem like a bitter man punishing an innocent child. That's when I understood. Jason wasn't just telling his side of the story. He was making me the villain. And he was using Emily as an emotional shield, knowing that no one would question the suffering of a teenage girl. Emily was in church that Sunday, sitting in the second row with Jason, crying during the hymns. A calculated performance to ensure the entire congregation saw how she was suffering because of her cruel grandfather. That's when I realized this wasn't about money anymore. It was about reputation, and Jason was determined to destroy mine. Do you know what my first reaction was when I realized Jason was publicly campaigning against me? It wasn't anger. It was almost relief. Because finally, he had shown his true nature. A manipulator willing to use his own daughter to get what he wanted. I spent 3 days planning my response. It wasn't going to be emotional. It wasn't going to be dramatic. It was going to be factual, documented, irrefutable. Because I had something Jason never had in his life, the discipline to build a solid case. The first thing I did was call Tom, my lawyer. Tom, I need your help with a defamation case. Robert, do you want to sue your son? I don't want to sue anyone. I want to protect myself. He's spreading rumors that I'm senile, that I'm cutting off my granddaughter's support out of spite. I need documentation to prove otherwise. Tom helped me organize everything. Bank statements from the last 8 years showing monthly transfers, Emily's school payment receipts, invoices for the gifts I bought for them, even photos of Christmas dinner that I had taken before they arrived. Second thing, I spoke with people who really knew me. Carlos, my supervisor for 20 years, who knew exactly what kind of father and grandfather I was. Dr. Patterson, the family doctor, who knew my mental condition perfectly. Pastor Williams, from the previous church I attended, who had witnessed how I cared for Margaret during her illness. Third thing, I stopped defending myself and started asking questions. When someone came to talk to me about Emily's suffering, I would ask, "Did you know that I paid $144,000 for her private school tuition over the last 8 years?" When they talked about my cruelty, I would ask, "Did you know that Jason, 35, has never worked a single day and lives off my pension?" The change was immediate. People started doing the math in their heads. $144,000 in school, $2,500 a month in allowance, a 35-year-old man without a job. Suddenly the story wasn't so simple after all. But the turning point came when I decided to make my own public presentation. And I chose the perfect place. The congregation's annual dinner, where 150 people gathered to celebrate the past year. Jason and Emily were going to be there, of course. She loved these events because she received attention and sympathy from everyone. He went because he liked being seen as a dedicated father battling adversity. I signed up to give a 5-minute testimony about lessons learned in family. When the pastor announced my name, I saw Jason turn pale. He knew I wasn't one to speak in public without a reason. And there, in front of 150 people who had heard his version of the story, I told mine. The week before the congregation dinner was the most productive of my life in terms of organization. I structured my presentation like a business proposal, because that's exactly what it was. I was selling the truth to people who had bought into a lie. I printed 15 copies of a 3-page document. First page, a timeline of expenses for Jason and Emily since 2015. Second page, copies of bank statements showing monthly transfers. Third page, photos of the 2023 Christmas dinner, time-stamped, showing the care I had put into the preparation. Each page had handwritten notes of mine explaining the context. December 2019, $35,000 for Jason's car because the old one didn't impress. January 2021, $8,000 in medical expenses for Emily because Jason didn't have health insurance. Total in 8 years, $291,000, equivalent to 15 years of my retirement. I practiced my speech in front of the mirror. 5 minutes timed. Emotional tone, no anger, just facts. Because anger makes people doubt your credibility. Facts make them doubt the other person's version. On Saturday before dinner, Jason called me. It was the first time he had taken the initiative to talk to me since I cut off the money. "Dad, I heard you're going to speak at the congregation dinner." "I am going, yes." "About what?" "About family, about responsibility, about the lessons I've learned being a father and grandfather." A long silence. He was calculating whether he should try to dissuade me or if that would seem like an admission of guilt. "Dad, I hope you won't use this moment to attack us publicly. Emily is already suffering enough." "Jason, you spent an entire month telling the whole church that I'm a senile old man who abandoned his family out of spite. Now you're worried about public attacks. That's different. I just recounted what happened. You told your version of what happened. On Sunday, people will hear my version as well. And what's your version?" "The truth. On Saturday night, I was so nervous I could barely sleep. Not because of the speech. I'd spoken to larger groups before when presenting construction projects. It was because I knew that after Sunday, there would be no going back. Any possibility of reconciliation with Jason would be buried for good. But then I remembered the disgusted look on his face when he saw the Christmas dinner. I remembered Emily agreeing that my house was embarrassing. I remembered 35 years of a son who never said thank you, never acknowledged sacrifice, never showed a shred of genuine gratitude. And I decided, to hell with reconciliation. I wanted justice. Sunday, February 4th, 6:30 p.m. The church hall was packed. The smell of roast chicken filled the air, and lively conversations filled the air among families who had known each other for decades. I arrived punctually, wearing my best suit, the same one I wear to important business meetings. Jason and Emily were already there, seated at a table near the stage. Strategic on his part. He wanted everyone to see Emily's reaction during my speech, probably hoping she would cry at the right moment to make me look cruel. Emily looked lovely in the blue dress I'd bought her for her 15th birthday. Ironic. Jason was tense, fiddling with his phone, probably telling someone to keep an eye on what the old man was going to say. When Pastor Mike called me to the stage, there was an immediate silence. 150 people who had heard for weeks about Robert the madman who abandoned his family were finally going to hear what I had to say. "Good evening, brothers," I began, my firm voice echoing through the hall. "I want to speak to you today about a difficult lesson I learned at age 68, the difference between loving someone and being used by someone." I saw Jason stiffen in his chair. "Many of you have known me for years. You know that I lost my wife Margaret 10 years ago. You know that I raised my granddaughter Emily alone after her mother abandoned the family. You know that I have always been a hard-working man who built a business from scratch and always put family first." Nods of agreement throughout the room. So far, nothing controversial. But sometimes when we love too much, when we give too much, we create people who confuse generosity with obligation. People who stop being grateful because they think they deserve everything without giving anything in return. Now the atmosphere has changed. People have started paying real attention. I'm going to share some numbers with you. Over the last 8 years, I've spent $291,000 supporting my adult son and granddaughter. Private school, a new car, an apartment, a monthly allowance of $2,500. Everything documented, everything with receipts, everything given with love. Murmurs began. $291,000 was more money than most people in that room earned in 10 years. And do you know what my return on that investment was? Last Christmas, when I prepared a special dinner, the recipe my late wife used, my son told me that my food looked like something a beggar would eat. Emily started to cry. Jason was blushing. My granddaughter, who is here today, agreed that my house was embarrassing and depressing. The same house where she grew up, where she was loved, where she never lacked anything. The silence was now deafening. I picked up the envelope with the documents and started distributing them to the nearest tables. I brought some evidence for anyone who wants to verify if I'm making up a story, I said, maintaining a calm and factual tone. People started passing the papers around. Bank statements don't lie. Amounts in black and white, dates, religious monthly transfers for 8 years straight. Some people literally dropped their mouths when they saw the numbers. When I cut off that financial support, which I was never obligated to give to a 35-year-old man, do you know how I was portrayed? As a senile old man who abandoned his family out of wounded pride. I looked directly at Jason. My son spread rumors throughout the community that I had mental problems. He used my granddaughter as an emotional shield, making her cry in public to gain sympathy. All this to pressure you into convincing me to go back to supporting his life. Pastor Mike was clearly uncomfortable, but he couldn't interrupt me mid-testimony. I want to make one thing clear, I continued. I love my granddaughter Emily more than my own life. And that's precisely why I stopped funding a lifestyle that was teaching her to be ungrateful, arrogant, and dependent. Emily was sobbing now, but they were tears of shame, not of performative sadness. Emily, darling, I said, looking directly at her, I will always love you. But true love teaches responsibility, not dependence. And responsibility means learning that no one owes you anything just because you exist. I turned to the congregation. For weeks you've been approaching me saying I'm cruel to an innocent child. But Emily is 16 years old. At her age, I was already working part-time to help my family. At her age, Margaret was already taking care of her younger siblings, while her mother worked outside the home. Sarah, who had confronted me about being cruel, was looking at the documents with a shocked expression. What I'm doing isn't cruelty. It's belated education. I'm teaching that money is earned through work, that respect is gained through gratitude, and that family isn't a bank where you withdraw love and money without ever depositing anything. The energy in the room had completely shifted. Jason was no longer seen as the devoted son fighting against an impossible father. Now he was being seen for what he truly was, an adult parasite who had manipulated the entire community. And for those who think I'm being too harsh, I concluded, let me ask you a question. If you found out you'd been supporting someone for 8 years and that person said your food looks like something a beggar would eat, what would your reaction be? Total silence. The effect was immediate and brutal. Before I even finished stepping off the stage, I saw people discreetly moving away from the table where Jason and Emily were sitting. That kind of social distancing that happens when you find out someone has been lying to you for weeks. Jason tried to control the damage. He stood up and asked to clear up some misunderstandings, but Pastor Mike said there was no time for more testimonies that night. Translation: You've already dug your grave deep enough. During dinner, I observed the interactions. Where Emily had previously received constant attention and sympathy, now people avoided eye contact. Where Jason had managed to have conversations about how he was struggling to keep the family together, he now received only polite and brief greetings. Martha, my neighbor, came to my table looking like she'd eaten something sour. Robert, I need to apologize. I believed Jason's version without question. $291,000. My God, I had no idea. Dr. Patterson, who was at the next table, raised his voice loud enough for several people to hear. Robert, as your family doctor, I can attest that you are more mentally lucid than 90% of men your age. This talk of mental problems is ridiculous. Sarah, who had confronted me about being cruel, was visibly embarrassed. She came up to me as I was leaving and said, Robert, I'm so sorry. Emily told me a completely different version of the story. I should have talked to you before jumping to conclusions. Emily is a 16-year-old girl, I replied. She told the version her father taught her to tell. It's not her fault. But Jason was practically socially ostracized that very night. I saw him trying to approach several people who simply made excuses and walked away. The community had realized it had been manipulated, and nobody likes to find out they've been fooled. On Monday morning, Jason called me. His voice was defeated, but he lacked his usual arrogance. Dad, you ruined our reputation. I restored my reputation, Jason. The difference is that mine was being attacked with lies, and yours fell because people discovered the truth. Emily is suffering at school. Her friends' mothers are avoiding her. Emily is learning that actions have consequences, something you should have taught her a long time ago. What do you want? For me to publicly humiliate myself by apologizing? I want you to get a job. I want you to stop teaching Emily that being supported by others is normal. And I want you to understand one thing. Respect isn't asked for. It's earned. The call ended with him hanging up. 3 days later, I learned that he had signed up with a temporary employment agency. His first real job at 35. Emily called me at the end of the week, crying, Grandpa, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you spent so much money on us. Jason said it was your responsibility. Darling, it wasn't an obligation. It was love. But love without gratitude becomes exploitation. It was then that I realized my strategy had worked. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect. 2 months after my presentation at church, Jason faced the reality that every adult man should have faced 20 years ago, living paycheck to paycheck. And he discovered that minimum wage doesn't pay for an upper-middle-class lifestyle. The first job he got was at a telemarketing company. $12 an hour, 40 hours a week. After taxes, He took home about $1,600 a month. In context, I was sending them $2,500 a month, which is more than his full salary. The math was simple and brutal. Cheap apartment cost $800, basic food $400, transportation $200, clothes and personal expenses $150, total $1,550. That left $50 a month for any emergencies. Zero for Emily's private school. Emily had to enroll in public school. It wasn't the end of the world. I went to public school myself. But for a girl who had spent her whole life thinking she deserved the best, it was a severe culture shock. My friends from private school stopped calling. The expensive trips to the mall ended. The designer clothes I used to buy every month were replaced by basic clothes from department stores. Jason tried to find a better job, but discovered that aspiring writer doesn't impress hiring managers. Without real work experience, without references, without specific skills beyond good verbal communication, he was limited to entry-level jobs. Reality arrived in waves. First wave, discovering that working 40 hours a week is exhausting. Second wave, discovering that your boss has no patience for employees who think they deserve special treatment. Third wave, discovering that $1,600 a month is not enough money. Emily called me 3 months after the financial cut, not to ask for money, but to tell me something surprising. "Grandpa, I got a part-time job at a diner. I'm earning my own money for the first time in my life. How do you feel?" "Tired," she laughed. "But I don't know. It's good to know I can support myself. I'd never thought about that before." Jason took longer to learn. He would call from time to time, no longer demanding money, but borrowing it. Always promising to pay it back, always with an emergency excuse. "Dad, it's only $500 to fix the car. I can't work without a car." "Jason, when my car broke down, I used to take the bus until I saved up enough money for repairs. That's your problem now." "Dad, Emily needs school supplies, and I won't get paid until Friday." "Jason, public school provides basic materials for free. If she wants something extra, she can buy it with her own money." Each no became easier. Because I had discovered something liberating. The world didn't end when I stopped solving their problems. In fact, they started solving their own problems. And you know what else changed? Emily started visiting me of her own accord, not because Jason forced her. She started asking about my work, about how I built my business, about how I managed to make money appear when she was little. It was then that I realized, by cutting off the money, I had gotten my granddaughter back. 6 months after I cut off funding, Jason showed up at my door one Sunday afternoon. He didn't come in without permission this time. He knocked, waited for me to answer, and asked if he could talk. He looked different, thinner, simply dressed, his hands calloused from work. He'd gotten a job at a moving company after telemarketing didn't work out. For the first time in his life, Jason looked like a grown man. "Dad," he said as he sat down in my kitchen, "I came to apologize." I remained silent, 40 years waiting for those words. I was wrong about everything. About the Christmas dinner, about you being forced to support us, about spreading rumors that you had mental problems. He paused, looking at his own hands. About teaching Emily that you were an ATM instead of a grandfather. Continue. These 6 months were the hardest of my life, but they were also the most important. For the first time, I understood what you did for us. Not just the money, which was a lot of money, but the constant responsibility, the worry, the burden of supporting other people. He looked up at me. "Dad, I've never thanked you. In 35 years of life, I've never stopped to genuinely thank you for everything you've done for me." "Jason, let me finish," he interrupted. "You gave me a home, food, an education, a car, money, emotional support when Margaret died, when Emily was born, when I couldn't find a job. You paid for a lawyer when I needed custody of Emily. You took care of her when I was finding myself. You did everything a father should do and much more." The words came out as if he had rehearsed them, but the emotion was genuine. And how did I repay you? By treating you like an employee, by teaching Emily that her generosity was an obligation, by feeling ashamed of your friends, your home, your food. He shook his head. I was a terrible son. He wasn't a horrible son, Jason. He was a spoiled son. There's a difference. Is there forgiveness for a spoiled child? I looked at him for a long moment. This man I had raised, whom I had loved unconditionally, who had deeply disappointed me, who was finally learning to be an adult. Jason, I forgave you months ago, but forgiveness doesn't mean going back to how things were before. He nodded. I know. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking you to start supporting us again. I just want you to know that I've learned my lesson. What lesson? Respect is earned. Gratitude is shown. And being a son doesn't give me the right to use you for the rest of my life. It was the most mature conversation we've had in decades. Jason stayed at my house that afternoon, and we talked about things we'd never talked about before. About Margaret. About how he felt when she died. About how my total dedication to the two of them after her death had made him too dependent. Dad, I think you shielded me from reality so much that I never learned how to deal with it, he admitted. When Margaret died, you took over everything. You cooked, cleaned, paid bills, took care of Emily. I never had to grow up. I thought I was helping. You were there. But helping too much can sometimes be harmful. It was true. In my attempt to spare Jason suffering, I had created a man who didn't know how to suffer constructively. Emily is different too, he continued. Working at the diner, studying at a public school, making new friends. She's learning the value of money for the first time. How is she coping with the change? Better than I expected. In fact, I think she's more mature now, in 6 months, than she was in the last 3 years. He smiled sadly. She told me last week, Dad, I like myself more now that I know I can take care of myself. This moved me more than I expected. Jason, let me explain something I've learned these past few months. True love isn't about giving someone everything they want. True love is about giving them what they need to become a better person. Emily needed to learn independence, and you needed to learn responsibility. And you? What did you need to learn? The question caught me off guard. I needed to learn that I'm not obligated to accept disrespect just because I love someone. That love without reciprocity becomes exploitation. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. Jason was quiet for a moment. Dad, can I ask you a question? Of course. Do you still love us? Even after everything? Jason, I love you more today than I did 6 months ago. Like this? Because today, I love the man you are becoming, not just the child you were. Today I see you fighting, working, growing. That's worth more to me than all the years of ease I offered before. When he left that night, we hugged. A real hug between grown men who respected each other, not the obligatory hug between a father and a dependent son. Dad, thank you for forcing me to grow up. Thank you for growing up, son. It was the best Father's Day gift I've ever received. A year after cutting off the financial support, my life was completely transformed. Not only because I had recovered $2,500 a month in my budget, but because I had recovered my identity as a man, not as an obligatory provider. Emily, now 17, worked 20 hours a week at the diner and was getting better grades in public school than she ever had in private. Grandpa, she told me during a visit, when I had everything for free, I didn't appreciate anything. Now that I have to work to buy things, every achievement is special. Jason had been promoted at the moving company and was taking a technical course in logistics at night, paying for it out of his own pocket. It's amazing how quickly you learn when nobody else is going to solve your problems, he joked. They used to come to dinner with me every Sunday now, not because they needed my money, but because they wanted my company. Jason helped cook. Emily talked about her work and her new friends. We talked about books, politics, dreams for the future. And you know what the biggest change was? They started giving me gifts. Nothing expensive. Jason didn't have money for that, but thoughtful gifts. A tool I needed for a repair at home. A book Emily thought I'd like. A framed photo of the three of us that Jason had made. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just the guy giving things. I was receiving them too. With money left over every month, I started living for myself. I renovated the kitchen, the same one Jason had despised that fateful Christmas. I bought a new car. I took a trip to the Grand Canyon, something Margaret and I had always wanted to do, but we never had the money. I started attending hobby groups, made new friends, and resumed activities I had abandoned when I became the full provider for my extended family. I discovered that at 68 years old, I still had my own life to live. The inheritance money Jason was hoping for, it was already being put to good use. The Children's Hospital Foundation sent quarterly reports showing how my donation was helping children with cancer. It was infinitely more rewarding than funding the arrogance of an adult son. Jason never asked about inheritance again. In fact, he told me, "Dad, do whatever you want with your money. You've already given us more than we deserve." Last Christmas, they gave me something I hadn't received in years, a Christmas dinner prepared by them. Emily cooked the dessert, Jason made the turkey, and all I had to do was show up and be honored. "This is the real gift," Jason said during the prayer, "to be able to give back a little of everything you've done for us." It was the best Christmas of my life. If you've made it this far in this story, you've probably recognized something familiar. Maybe you're the parent or grandparent who supports adult children who show no gratitude. Maybe you're the person who was raised believing that family love comes without responsibilities. Or maybe you're someone who's tired of being used by people who should love you. Let me tell you what I've learned. Boundless love is not a virtue, it's weakness. And weakness doesn't build character in anyone, neither in the receiver nor the giver. When I cut off Jason and Emily's funding, many people told me I was being cruel. "They're your family," they said. "Family always helps family." But no one asked, what happens when family uses family? What happens when love turns into exploitation? What happens when generosity teaches ingratitude? What I've discovered is that helping too much can be just as harmful as not helping at all. When you remove all the consequences of someone's bad choices, you're teaching them that bad choices are priceless. When you solve all of someone's problems, you're teaching them that problems always have an external solution. Jason needed to learn that work dignifies. Emily needed to learn that achievements are more valuable than gifts. And I needed to learn that being truly loved is different from being financially needed. The hardest thing I've ever done in my life wasn't building a business from scratch or raising a child alone after Margaret died. It was saying no to people I loved when they were asking for things that would harm them in the long run. Today, a year and a half later, I can say, it was the best decision I ever made. Jason is a man. Emily is a responsible young woman. And I am respected in my own family. If you are supporting someone who disrespects you, who treats your generosity as an obligation, who never shows genuine gratitude, consider this. Perhaps the most loving thing you can do is stop. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of good manners. Because someone who truly loves wants to see the other person grow, not remain dependent forever. And if someone says you're being cruel, ask, is it more cruel to teach responsibility or to create a perpetually dependent person? The answer will be obvious. True love sometimes seems harsh, but temporary harshness builds lasting strength. Today is December 15th, and I'm preparing Christmas dinner for 2024. But this time it's different. Emily will arrive at 4 p.m. to help me with dessert. She learned to make Margaret's pumpkin pie better than I did. Jason will bring the wine and make the turkey stuffing, a recipe he researched online especially to please me. They're going to sleep here on Christmas Eve, just like we used to when Emily was little. Not because they don't have money for a hotel, but because they want to spend time with me. Jason got a better apartment closer to work. Emily is saving for college. She wants to study business administration, inspired by seeing how I built my business. The funny thing is that now that they don't need my money, our relationship has improved infinitely. We talk about everything: work, relationships, future plans, even about Margaret and how proud she would be to see Jason becoming a responsible man. Emily brought her boyfriend to meet me last month, an 18-year-old boy who works in a mechanic shop and studies at night. "Grandpa, he reminds me of you when you were young," she said. "Hard-working, determined, not afraid to sweat to get what he wants." Jason is dating someone too. A woman his age who works as a nurse, has her own children, and isn't looking for someone to support her. "Dad, it's amazing dating someone who doesn't see me as ATM," he joked. "And me? I'm dating someone too. Dorothy, a 64-year-old widow I met in a senior citizens dance group. She has her own pension, her own house, her own interests. We complement each other instead of depending on one another." "Robert," she told me last week, "you're the first man I've met who doesn't want me to be your nurse or your financial dependent. You want a real partner." If this isn't irony of fate, at 68, I've finally learned how to have healthy relationships, including with my own family. Business is going well. Without the monthly drain of $2,500, I was able to invest in new equipment, hire 2 more employees, and even give Carlos a raise after 20 years of loyalty. And you know what's even better? When Jason comes to work with me some Saturdays, not because he needs the extra money, but because he wants to learn about construction. "Dad, I want to understand how you built all this. Maybe one day I'll start my own business." If you're going through something similar to what I went through, supporting people who disrespect you, being treated as an obligation instead of a blessing, questioning whether it's cruel to set boundaries with those you love, let me give you some advice. The courage to say no today can be the gift that transforms your family forever. Not out of malice, but out of love. Love that educates, not love that spoils. Because in the end, it's pointless to have a family if that family doesn't respect you. And respect, my friends, can't be bought. It's earned. And speaking of new beginnings and second chances, you won't believe the story playing on your screen right now. A man who got divorced, rebuilt his life, and when his ex-wife showed up at Christmas wanting reconciliation, well, she got an unexpected surprise. It's one of those stories that shows how life takes incredible turns. Click there and find out what happened when the past came knocking, but the present was already very well resolved. I'm sure you'll identify with this twist,